Alright, thanks for tuning in for what's going to be the last video in the split top Roubo bench series that I've been producing over the last few months. It's been quite a long ride, but in this video we're going to finish up just the last little few details. So things like the bench dogs, the sliding Deadman, the gap stop, the lower shelf, and you're definitely going to want to stick around until the end of the video to see some of the oil get put onto this beast, because some of the grain on the walnut pieces like the chop really pop, as well as the tiger maple on the front laminate and those houndstooth dovetails. So without further ado, let's finish things up. Probably the easiest way to make the bench dogs is to batch them all out at the same time. So prepare enough of your stock so that you have enough to do all of them at once. Set up a stop block on a crosscut sled and just start making them until you have enough, maybe even a spare one or two, just in case a mistake gets made along the way. Now, there's going to be a lot of different ways you can actually make these bench dogs, at least in the sequence you make your cuts and how you go about creating them. But I'm going to take you through the process that I used because it just made sense to me, but feel free to do it however you like. The first cut that I'm making here is a 2-degree cut on the top of each bench dog. If you remember from a few videos ago, we made the dog holes in the top of the bench at a 2-degree canted angle. So putting a 2-degree angle on the top of the bench dog will allow it to sit flush with the top of the bench once they're all done. In order to prevent the bench dogs from falling through the bench, the top of the bench dog needs to be larger than the bottom of it. So I just followed the bench crafted plans and I created somewhat of a notch on the bench dog side and then ripped off the little strip so that the bottom portion would actually be able to fit into the dog hole in the dog hole strip of the top. In order for the bench dogs to stay at whatever set height you put them at in the bench, they need to have some form of friction in the actual dog hole itself. That's created by a wood spring that's attached to this little angled portion that I'm creating right here. So if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I really take a lot of time to do my best work and make things precise. So it probably comes to no surprise that I'm fitting each one of these bench dogs individually into each dog hole. I used the hand plane for this because I really like using hand tools and it relaxes me. And to be honest, I really didn't care that it took a little bit of extra time compared to using a power planer to prepare the stock a little differently before I cut all the blanks out. If you enjoy watching me work with hand tools, leave me a comment down below so that I know to include more of it in future videos, and maybe even let me know how you might do certain tasks differently with power tools or other hand tools. And if you want to call me names, feel free to do that as well, because I know that I'm very particular. I've been like that probably since I was 5 years old or so, and sometimes it can be a blessing and a curse all at the same time. I used one of the bench dogs as a guide in order to cut a whole bunch of small pieces of crubber to line the jaws of them with so that they'll grab much better when I'm holding work pieces down the road. It's really easy to attach the crubber just by using some rubber cement or some contact cement. You just brush it on both surfaces, the bench dog and the backside of the crubber. You wait about 10 or 15 minutes until it's dry and tacky and stick them together, and they're not coming apart anytime soon. I've had people tell me that when they do this, they don't have to replace that crubber for probably like 10 years or so. It's pretty darn durable stuff. In Benchcrafted's plans or construction notes, they actually recommend that you make the wood springs out of ash or maple and that you screw them on so you can replace them if they break down the road. Now, I had a perfectly sized piece of walnut from some offcut or scrap that was going to work perfect for this, so rather than milling up a fresh piece of maple or ash, I just used what I had here. It's also a good idea to lightly chamfer the bottom and the top edges of each one of the bench dogs so that as you throw them around and abuse them over the years, they don't end up splintering or cracking up along the edges. I have no idea why you're still watching my video, but since you are, you might as well give me a thumbs up so that it'll help this video get pushed out to more viewers like yourself, and subscribe to my channel while you're at it. That'll be a big help also. If you've never worked with walnut before, you're probably wondering why I've got blue painter's tape all over my sliding Deadman. Well, the reason for that is because pencil just doesn't show up on walnut very well whatsoever, so I used the painter's tape to indicate where to drill all the holes and how to shape the sides of the sliding Deadman. Since I made this video clip, I was given a Pica pencil, and they have different colored leads, and the red one marks very nicely on walnut and shows up great. The sliding Deadman has a full width tenon on the top of it so that it can slide back and forth in the dado that's on the bottom of the top of the bench. And rather than setting up a dado stack for this one cut, I just used the table saw and made a series of cuts over and over again until I had it roughed out. The tenon obviously needed a bit of cleanup, so I used my Lee Nielsen router plane for that. And I did an unboxing and first time using the tool video a while back. I'll leave a link up top and down below. But after a little bit of trial fitting and a little bit of fine tuning, it fit perfectly into the dado on the bottom side of the top. Next, I set the table saw blade to 45 degrees so I could cut the notch on the bottom of the sliding Deadman to allow it to move back and forth on the bench. At this point, the sliding Deadman's basically done, but I didn't want just a plain rectangular one, so I followed the design in the bench-crafted plans. And because I use my bandsaw primarily for resawing, I didn't bother wasting any time to switch the blade to a narrower one to make this cut nice and easy. So I just made a bunch of notches so that I could get most of the material removed, and then I used my oscillating spindle sander to clean up the curve and the random orbit sander to clean up the straight section of the side. I chamfered the entire perimeter of the sliding Deadman as well as the insides of every hole using a bearing guided chamfer bit in the router. As you can see here, the surface of the sliding Deadman got banged up pretty good, but that was pretty easy to rectify just using the number 7 wood river on the entire surface. After I finished cleaning up the outside face of the sliding Deadman, I ran my hand across it to check the smoothness, and it made a really cool sound. Let me know what you think of this. Next, I began to work on the gap stop, and I cut a bunch of spacer blocks in order to divide the gap stop into some segments so that I could separate my tools and keep them from touching one another and potentially nicking one of the cutting edges on a chisel or the teeth on one of my dovetail saws when I was using it. All of the dividers are pin nailed into the gap stop except for the wider ones. They're actually glued, and I did this on purpose because I thought maybe down the road I might want to reconfigure where the dividers are, and I'd probably be able to pry them out and reconfigure them at a later date if I decided I wanted to. In order to ensure a nice flush edge, I ended up making all the dividers a little bit longer than what they needed to be, and then I just zipped them all off with the table saw. Now, you may not be aware of this, but the gap stop actually has two purposes. Obviously, it can be used to store your tools while you're working at the bench, but a less known function of it is that it can be used as a planing stop. If you cut a couple of notches in the bottom of it that are 5/8 of an inch high, you can actually key it into the top rails of the base of your bench. This prevents it from sliding side to side while you want it sitting flush with the top of the surface of the bench. But if you actually pick it up and slide it one way or the other, it will sit proud of the top surface of the bench 5/8 of an inch, allowing you to plane a board that is thicker than that. When it came time to make the lower shelf for the bench, I needed to resaw some of the 8/4 stock I had on hand in order to make the shelf the required 3/4 of an inch thick. After they were cross-cut and ripped to the correct dimensions, it was time to begin making the shiplaps. There's lots of different ways to create shiplaps. One really easy way is to use a dado stack in your table saw, but I just didn't want to waste my time setting that up for 7 shelf boards. So I just made sure I was really careful with how high I had my blade, as well as where I set my fence in order to create them all. The two end shelf boards need to be notched so they can fit around the legs of the base. The only catch is the dimensions of the notches are a little bit different on each end of the shelf board, so don't let that throw you off. Now you could leave all your shiplap boards just like this with a 16th inch gap in between them, but I kind of wanted to dress it up a little bit more, so I wanted to chamfer it and make them like this particular one right here. So let's do that. A few months ago, I did make a whole video on how to do this by hand, so I won't get into it right here. I'll leave a link up top as well as in the description down below. Once they're all done, you just drop them in place, and this is the end result. Let me know in the comments down below if you like how this shelf looks. After I brought all the wood home for the Roubo bench, I went through the stack of maple and walnut to try and find some boards that had some character to them so I could use those in more visible places like this front right leg where the holdfasts are going to actually be stored. I saved what I thought was the best piece of walnut for the chop. Look at how the grain pops when I put the oil on it. If you haven't seen my video on how to make houndstooth dovetails, I'll leave a link up top and in the description down below. I saved what I think was the best piece of soft maple from the stack to use for the front laminate. It's this beautiful piece of curly or tiger maple. Let me know what you think. Well, there you have it. It's all done. A split top Roubo bench. A really rewarding project to build and something you'll use for the rest of your life. Until next time, go build something beautiful.